This video is for Module 7 in Marine Biology, which is the second module that deals with the marine vertebrates. So in this module, we are going to be dealing with kingdom Animalia, and the three classes that we will be discussing are class Reptilia, class Aves, so the birds, and then class Mammalia, or the mammals. And we're going to go out, your book covers these in this order, but we're going to go out of order because there are some really important concepts in class Mammalia that I want to be sure that we have time to get to. So we're going to start with class Mammalia, and then we'll work our way through Reptilia and Aves as time allows. So let's go ahead and get started with class Mammalia. And we're going to work our way through several different orders for class Mammalia. And the first one that we will do is order Cetacea. Order Cetacea, and this includes dolphins, porpoises, and whales. So maybe you didn't know that dolphins and porpoises are in the same order as whales, but they are. The members of this order, they breathe air. And they do that through a blowhole. And their blowhole really is just basically the same thing that our nostril is. It's just an opening on the head to the outside so that air can breathe in. You may remember that some of the requirements for something to be considered a mammal are that they have hair. So all of these organisms have hair in a few areas of their body. They don't have hair everywhere, but they do have hair on a few areas of their body. They are viviparous. And you remember from the last module that means that the nourishment for the young is provided by the mother through a placenta and some type of cord or attachment. It's not exactly an umbilical cord in every mammal, but it's something that is very similar to that. And then the mothers also produce milk for their young. Okay, so this would be true for all of these members of order Cetacea. When we think about how the members of this order swim, if you think about a fish tail, so a fish tail is flat side to side. And so when a fish swims, they move that tail side to side, and so the body movement as a fish swims is also side to side. That is different for order Cetacea because their tail is flat up and down, or like top to bottom. And so that means that when they swim, their body goes up and down. And if you've seen dolphins, particularly swimming in a zoo or aquarium type situation, you've seen that. So the body moves up and down because their tail is flat in the up and down, the top and bottom part of the tail. It's flat on that side. So generally we divide order Cetacea into two categories. And those two categories are the toothed whales and the baleen whales. So the toothed whales are carnivores, and this includes dolphins. It includes dolphins. It includes porpoises. So those are all considered toothed whales. The largest whale in the world is the sperm whale. Oh, the largest of this category are the sperm whales. They're also the most numerous whale. So these, because they're carnivores, they eat things like fish, they eat squid, and they use their teeth to grasp that food. They don't chew it, they swallow it whole, but they use the teeth to grasp it, and then they swallow it whole. The baleen whales are then those that do filter feeding. So those types of whales would be those that filter feed and eat plankton. Okay, so those are the two main ways that we divide order Cetacea, are by the toothed whales and the baleen whales. Okay, next let's look at some of the anatomy, and then I will give you we'll look at a picture. So when you look at a member of the order Cetacea, you will see that they have mammary slits, and that obviously is to feed the young. And then another opening that you will see is the urogenital slit. So the it's one slit, but so it's used for waste, to eliminate waste, but then it's also used for reproduction. Okay, so urogenital slit. You will also see a navel, because there you get the connection of the young to the mother. So let's see if we can get a picture up here for us to see that. Clear this away first. 7.9. Okay, so this figure, so you can see that this shows both the toothed whale on the top and the baleen whale on the bottom. But in both cases, you can, well, first of all, you see the blowhole. So we talked about how these organisms have this blowhole that is the means by which they can, one means by which they can take in air. And then we see here the mammary slits right here and here. So that is used for, those are involved in feeding the young. And then right near there, actually let's erase that because I kind of covered up. So the mammary slits I will try, they're hard, they're so close to each other, but in this area you have the mammary slits, there's one, mammary slits are here and here, and then in between those, which I'll mark with a blue color, then you see the urogenital slit. Okay, so the mammary slits for feeding the young, the urogenital slits for eliminating waste, and also for reproduction. You've probably heard of killer whales. So the killer whales are, though they eat seals, they eat sea otters, and they eat penguins. As I already said, the sperm whale is one of the largest, and it's also the most numerous. And we also mentioned that dolphins, porpoises, and I haven't mentioned the narwhal, but so the dolphin that we are most familiar with is called the bottlenose dolphin. So the dolphin that you will typically see in aquariums or at zoos is the bottlenose dolphin, and they have a pretty wide range in terms of where they live. The main difference between a dolphin and a porpoise, the porpoises are smaller, and their range is a little more limited, so they're more north. So they're in the North Atlantic and the North Pacific. And then also a member of this class cetacean is the narwhal, and you will recognize the narwhal because the male, usually when they're pictured, they usually show a male because the male has this long tusk. So it kind of looks like a unicorn type animal. But the dolphin, porpoise, and narwhal are all part of this of the same class cetacean. Let's talk a little bit about the toothless whale, or the baleen whales. One thing that is unique about them, so when they have these baleen, which are rows of filters, so they actually have like between 300 and 400 plates, and when these plates hang down from their lower jaw. And so then when the water comes into the mouth, it gets filtered at these plates. and then they will use their tongue to push the water out of the mouth. So the water comes in, it gets filtered, and the plankton is captured, as it were, by these plates, and then they use their tongue to push the water back out of their mouth. And then they also have these hairy bristles in their mouth that also help to catch or capture the plankton. So it's kind of it's very interesting how the baleen, the tongue, and these hairy bristles all are involved in making sure that the toothless whales get their food. The largest baleen whale is the blue whale. And that blue whale can get up to be about 200 tons. So that's this many pounds. So 200,000 pounds. And the blue whale is the largest creature on Earth. And as far as we know, it's the largest creature that has ever been on Earth. So even those animals that are now extinct, we don't think that anything has ever been larger than the blue whale. Another thing that you should be aware of on these whales is something called calicites, and I'll show you a picture here in just a moment. So where these whales have hair, they have these skin patches. And because they have hair there, they tend to get infested with hair lice. And then, so wherever there is that hair lice, that area takes on a different color. And interestingly enough, when scientists are studying whales in the wild, the patterns of these skin patches, because of this infestation by hair lice, are so different and so unique to each animal that scientists actually use those skin patches to help them identify the whales. So let me see if I can show you a picture of that. It's right here. Oh, that's not it. Oh, I thought I had a picture. Let's see. I guess I did not make a picture of that. It's figure 7.11 in your book. I guess I didn't scan that picture, but you can. It's very interesting, figure 7.11, where you can see those skin patches that are covered in lice. Okay, you are probably aware that many whales are threatened or endangered, and because of fishing, they tend to get, especially like porpoises and dolphins, tend to get caught in nets. The other thing that leads to part of why they are threatened is because they have a slow reproduction rate. And if you couple that slow reproduction rate with commercial fishing and some of them getting killed or caught in nets because of commercial fishing, then that means that a lot of them end up endangered. In this U.S., whales are not allowed to be hunted except by Native Alaskans, but that is not true in other countries where hunting is still allowed. So I know for example, the country of Japan still hunts whales. Maybe you're familiar. I don't know if it's on TV anymore, but there was a show that was called was it called Whale Wars? Where the people would a ship would go out and try to stop the Japanese fishermen from hunting whales. So in Japan, they to some extent they say that it is for research purposes, but I'm not sure that really holds up in truth. They are using it for the oil for blubber, from the blubber, and also in some cases for food sources. So just they are, a lot of them are endangered because of hunting, and also because of the fact that they reproduce at a very low rate. Okay, secondly, the second order we are going to do then, that is in the mammals, is order Sirenia. And this includes the manatees, and sea cows, and dugongs. I don't have a picture of a dugong, so maybe I'll leave that up to you to look up one. So these animals are herbivores. They tend to travel in groups, so they're not solitary. They also are endangered. And again, they are endangered because of overfishing, but also because they have, and if you couple that, if we weren't overfishing, they would be fine. But because of overfishing and slow reproduction, they are endangered. And in this country, again, they're not allowed to be hunted. So the manatee population in this country is actually making a bit of a comeback. So the numbers are increasing. One of the really good memories I have with my family is we lived in Florida for a year, and one of the things that we did was we, in the winter time, the manatees leave the cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean, and they come into the Gulf of Mexico and even into some of the streams or areas that feed into the Gulf of Mexico. And so you can swim. So you have to do it in the winter, so you have to wear a wetsuit to stay warm. But we all went out and swam with manatees in a river that is near the Gulf of Mexico, or that feeds into the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about order Sirenia. It's mainly the organism that you would be most aware of, most familiar with, would be the manatee. Okay, then we have order Pinnipedia. And this would include seals, sea lions, and walruses. These animals are carnivores. So they eat fish, squid. If you've ever been to a sea lion or seal or walrus show, you've seen them, that they, what they use to get the animal to perform different behaviors is fish. These animals they live in cold water, so they have thick blubber to protect against the cold. They reproduce on land. And there's often the question about how do you tell a sea lion from a seal. There's actually two ways. One is that the sea lions have an external ear. So they have a flap, like we have an external ear. That doesn't mean that the seals can't hear. It's not shown on here, but they actually have what's called a pinnae, which is like it's like a hole that allows sound to enter their head, and then that sound can travel into their head and can get to the brain for interpretation as sound. So external ear on the sea lion, no external ear on the seal, but they do have this pinnae. And then also shown on here, the sea lions, they are able to use their legs to walk on land, whereas the seals cannot. So they are, if they're on land, they can't move their, see how the sea lion can take their rear flippers and can kind of move them forward, so that allows them to walk. The seals cannot do that, so they cannot walk on land like the sea lions can. So main differences then are the external ear, and then the differences in how they walk on land. So that's all we have time to say about the order Pinnipedia. I want to say just a couple things that I just want to list. So there are a few marine type animals that are of the member Carnivora, which is the dog family, as it were. And these animals spend at least some of their time in the water or near the water. So the two examples of this would be sea otters and polar bears. I'm not really going to say anything more about those, but just be aware that there are carnivores as part of marine life. The sea otters, I know they have very thick fur because they tend to live in very cold climates, so they have to be able to withstand the cold. And so my daughter worked in Alaska one summer with sea otters, and the place that she worked would rescue stranded sea otters and then try to get them to the point where they're not able to be released because they don't learn how to groom from their mother. They don't learn how to take care of their fur from their mother, so that has to be done for them. But maintaining the fur for them is critical to their survival. And if something goes wrong with the maintenance of their fur, it can mean their death. So that is a critical thing for the sea otters. Okay, so now that we have gone through the those last orders, beginning of the order of kingdom Mammalia, I want to talk about some of the behaviors that the marine mammals have. And the first one I want to talk about is echolocation. So whales and pinnipeds, they vocalize a lot underwater. So they make a lot of sound, and not all of that sound is echolocation. Some of it we will talk a little bit about why other reasons that they vocalize. But so they do vocalize a lot underwater, but that's not necessarily echolocation. So what echolocation allows them to do is that they are able to analyze sound waves and by analyzing sound waves, they can locate objects in the water. And the way that, in terms of echolocation, the animal that has been studied the most is the dolphin, because more of those are held in captivity, so they're well studied. And basically, what happens is that they emit these short clicks at different frequencies. Now, frequency of sound is what determines the pitch. So a high frequency sound has a high pitch, a low frequency sound has a low pitch. And what happens is when they emit these clicks, some of the those clicks are emitted and they will hit some object. And then some of that sound will get reflected back to them, and they are able to analyze how long did it take for that sound to get back, and then through that they're able to determine things like distance. They can determine speed. If it's something that's moving, they can determine the speed of it. They can also determine the direction of the object that it hits. And they can emit these clicks at very rapid rates, and then so they have things. They're emitting the clicks, but then others are coming back at the same time. So what we know is that with low frequency clicks, so those would be the kind of lower pitch, what the information that because they can travel longer distances. So dolphins, we know that they use the low frequency clicks to get an idea of what is the surrounding area like. So they gather information about the surrounding area. Generally these clicks will reflect off of larger areas. Then they use the high frequency clicks. Those will those don't travel as far, and these high frequency clicks are outside of the human hearing range. So we have a limited frequency of sounds that we can hear, and these would be outside of that range. So we can't hear these. But what they can tell through these high frequency clicks is that they can get more detail about objects. So there was one study that showed that they could actually tell the difference between two types of fish, even though those fish were about the same size. So they can tell with the high frequency clicks, they can gather much more detail. Let me show you a picture here. So this, just the first thing I want you to look at is so these just indicate the outgoing clicks. So they'll send out this series of clicks, and then when those clicks hit whatever object is out here, then some of those are going to get reflected back, and they'll get these returning echoes, and the animal can then analyze those and get information from those. So what do they use echolocation for? Well, one thing they use it for is to find food. And I want to look at this figure in just a moment. So anytime something vocalizes, so anytime anything makes a sound that is considered vocalization, that means that it's going to require air. So for us, air has to move over our vocal cords in order for us to be able to make sounds. Well, these animals use this vocalization to find food, and therefore they need to be able to eat and breathe at the same time. And these organisms have been designed by God in a unique way so that they are able to do that. And the way that it is that their larynx, which would be like our vocal cords, their larynx is actually connected. The larynx goes up to a tube. And that tube connects to their blowhole. So that it basically separates their food passageway and their air passageway so that they can eat and they can breathe at the same time. It's very similar to humans, where there's a piece of tissue that is called the epiglottis that when we swallow, it closes off the space in the air, in our air tube, so that the food will go down into the esophagus, but so we can be breathing at the same time that we are eating. So the important thing here is the vocal cords are attached to this tube, and that tube connects to the blowhole, so that you're basically separating the the food passageway and the air passageway. so that they can eat and breathe and vocalize at the same time. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at a figure of that first. Okay, so I guess that's not shown on here, but I do want to show you some other really important things on this drawing. So here is the opening to the blowhole. Go back to our red color. Here's an opening to the blowhole right there, and that is a muscle. So there's this muscle that forms this nasal plug. Goes to the nasal plug is a muscle, and what that nasal plug does is as that muscle contracts and relaxes, it controls the air pressure. So it's kind of like if you've ever held a blown up balloon and then you kind of stretch the neck of the balloon and you let some of the air out and it kind of makes that squealing sound. It's the same idea here, but here this muscle controls the air pressure. It controls how the air gets left out of the head of this animal to leave the through the blowhole. Then we have these air sacs, and what those air sacs do, they're also muscle. So they contract and relax. And when they contract and relax, they actually are involved then in producing the clicks. Okay, so it's these muscles right here that constitute these air sacs that allow these clicks to be emitted. And then the other thing that you should see is when those clicks move forward, so here's those clicks are emitted, so they're aimed forward. The clicks are aimed forward, and then there's this structure here that's called the melon, right here. So the clicks go forward, and they're aimed onto this melon. Well, this melon is made out of fat. It's a lot of fatty material. And what that does is that focuses and helps to direct the sound waves. So these sound waves emitted by these air sacs, and then they're directed toward this melon, and then that melon is fat, and it helps to kind of give direction to those clicks. And then when those clicks are reflected back, so now we're looking at these structures here. When those clicks are reflected back, they hit the jaw. They hit this lower jaw of the animal, and that lower jaw is connected to what? It's connected to the inner ear. So now the animal is able to receive those signals in the inner ear, and then that ultimately goes to the brain, where those sounds can be interpreted. So it's an amazing way that these animals are made to produce those sounds, to direct and focus those sounds, and then to receive them back so that that message gets sent back to the brain and they can be interpreted. Your book mentions that if any part of this system is missing, the whole thing breaks down. And evolutionists would say that this system developed in parts over a long, long period of time, and yet when we look at the complexity of this structure of this system and understand that if any part of it is missing, then the whole thing breaks down. It really doesn't make sense that different parts could be made at different times because they only work if they are all working together. Okay, let's go back then. We're still talking about the mammals because they have some really interesting behaviors that we can talk about. So what is a spout? You've probably all seen videos or pictures of a spout coming from a whale. Well, you know that a whale, they have to come to the surface to breathe, right? Because they breathe through lungs, so they have to come to the surface to breathe. But when they come to the surface to breathe, their breath is going to be warm. So when they let out that breath, that's going to be warm. And when that warm air hits the cold air of the environment, what does that do? Well, you may know from your study of weather that water is going to condense. So anytime you get warm air hitting cold air, the water in that air will condense into droplets. So that's really all that a spout is. In addition to that, they also will have, there's also some warm moisture coming off their body. So they have the breath plus the moisture coming off their body and or off their skin. So when the water that condenses from the air and then the water that comes off from their skin, that it just will form this spout of water. And those spouts can be they can be very small. They can also be very, very large, depending on the amount of moisture that condenses. So that's what a spout is. Let's look at how, we know that a lot of the marine mammals dive, and depending on the animal, they can stay down anywhere between 6 and 90 minutes before they need to surface to get air. And as you know, when you hold your breath, oxygen levels in your body decrease and carbon dioxide levels increase. So these animals have to have a way to deal with this decreasing oxygen and this increasing CO2. And the way so there's several ways that they do that when they are diving. One way that they do that, well, if you look at these animals in general, they are very efficient at using and storing oxygen. So in other words, they don't waste their oxygen. They make sure that they make the best use of the oxygen that they have. So first of all, these organisms have a lot of blood, and their blood has a lot of red blood cells. So their blood so the combination of having a large blood volume and a lot of red blood cells, and you probably know that it's the red blood cells that transport and hold oxygen, or one of the places that holds oxygen, but it's also the way that that oxygen gets transported throughout the body. So the fact they have a lot of blood and that their blood has a lot of red blood cells, that helps them to store and maintain a lot of oxygen. In their muscles, they also have a protein that is called myoglobin. And this is a protein in muscle. And that myoglobin stores oxygen. In muscle. We have myoglobin too. In fact, some of the red color that you see from muscle is due to this myoglobin protein. So, and these animals that are able to go underwater for long periods of time, they tend to have a lot of myoglobin in their muscle. And then lastly, with regard to how do they use oxygen, when these animals are diving, so during a dive, their heart rate will decrease. And the other thing that they do is that their blood flows mostly to their vital organs. So in other words, they will the blood will kind of get shunted away from like the extremities, like their arms and legs type structures, and they'll make sure that the blood gets to their vital organs, and less blood will go to the areas where it's not as important. So all of these two things together will help to conserve the oxygen that they do have. So they have mechanisms by which they are able to conserve oxygen, and that enables them then to be able to do these deep dives. Okay, I want to talk about something called the bends that you may have heard of. So when you go to a deep depth, so you know that oxygen gets dissolved in water just because of the atmospheric pressure. Well, when you go to a deep depth, nitrogen will get dissolved into your blood. So if you dive down to a deep depth, so this is just due to so there's nitrogen in the air, and when a pressure is applied to that nitrogen, some of that nitrogen will get forced into your blood. So just due to the water pressure that is on top of your body. So you go to a deep depth, and some of this nitrogen gets dissolved in your blood. Well, if you surface too quickly, so as you're coming back up, if you do that too quickly, then as you've come up, you've decreased the pressure that is causing the nitrogen to be dissolved in your blood. And so what will happen is that some of the nitrogen that is dissolved in your blood will come out of the blood. So it'll come out of the solution of blood. and it will actually form bubbles in your blood. And those bubbles in your bloodstream can block or they can stop the flow of blood. And so they can block or stop the flow of blood. So the bends can be fatal if they are not dealt with properly in a medical situation. So that's why when you go scuba diving, when you learn to scuba dive, you learn that you have to come up slowly and you have to allow your body to adjust to the changes in pressure gradually, so that as that nitrogen is coming out of solution, it's able to leave the body without forming these bubbles in the blood. So how does that relate to marine mammals? Marine mammals. So what about the bens and marine mammals? They have flexible rib cages. So when they dive underwater, so when they go down, their lungs actually collapse. Not fully, but the lungs tend to deflate due to pressure. And then what happens is the air that was in their lungs goes into the upper part of the respiratory tract. So the air leaves the lungs and goes into the upper respiratory tract. The upper part of their respiratory system. And so what that means is that when they go down and then when they come back up, there's no air that is exchanged between their blood and the outside air, because the air that comes out of their lungs just goes into another part of the respiratory tract, and so the nitrogen gets pushed by pressure into the blood, and it never then comes out into the air. So it's due to this flexible rib cage that they have that we don't have, that they are able to withstand those deep dives and resurfacing without developing the bends. Let me say a few more things about behaviors, and then we'll be just about done. We're not going to have time to get to everything. So a behavior is something that it's an activity that an animal would do in their natural habitat. I know that people who work in zoos and things like that, where they do shows, are very sensitive to this idea that these are not tricks that the animal, they're not teaching the animal to do tricks. In other words, they're not teaching them to do something that they wouldn't do in their natural habitat. They're just giving them rewards and getting them to perform activities that they would do naturally. So that's why we call them behaviors. So why do, besides the echolocation, These animals use vocalization for a variety of reasons. And one of the main ones is they use it to communicate with each other. So they might communicate that there is food available in a certain area. They might sound an alarm. If they're trying to attract a mate, or even if birth has taken place, these animals will communicate with each other. So, and they will use different vocalizations depending on what it is that they are trying to communicate, and they know what those vocalizations mean. Maybe you've heard of whale songs. So the whale songs are used by males for attracting females. And the whale song is unique to an individual whale. So every whale every male whale would have its own sound that is used to attract a female for mating. Besides sound, these animals can also communicate by flapping or slapping, I guess is a better word, slapping their flippers against the water. That's used to communicate. There are some behaviors that just seem to have no purpose except for fun. So there seem to be some behaviors that are just for play. One interesting behavior that we sometimes see in marine mammals is something called stranding. And in stranding, what they will do is they'll swim to shore, and then they will get washed up on the beach. And these animals are, the functioning of their organs is dependent on the buoyancy of the water. So if without the support of the water, their internal organs cannot function properly and they'll die. And so scientists don't really know why they strand. Some people have suggested that if one of them is sick, they will strand, and then because they are such communal animals, that the others will just join that one that is sick and then if they're not put back in the water, then they will all die. But we really don't understand fully why stranding takes place. Okay, let's talk about mating and reproduction, and then we will finish up with the mammals. So they are viviparous. So they have a placenta through which the young are fed. And it varies depending on the organism. Some of them that have mating pairs for their whole lives. Others of them, there might just be one male with a group of females. So it varies depending on the particular organism. Let's talk a little bit about the pinnipeds. So they will travel to a breeding area once per year. So they mate and give birth out of the water. Mate and give birth on land. So when they go to their breeding area, they are either going to mate or they're going to give birth. Here's an interesting thing about the pinnipeds. So if they get pregnant when they are at the breeding ground, then they don't return. They'll return 1 year later to give birth. And they will return to the same place. However, the gestational period for a pinniped is less than a year. So they get pregnant while they're at the breeding ground. They leave and they come back a year later to give birth, but the gestational period is less than a year. And so what happens is that when they get pregnant at the breeding ground, the embryo will lie dormant. So it'll become dormant and just will stop developing. For up to a couple months. And then it will get implanted. Then it gets implanted in the uterus and it starts to grow. So that when they return to that breeding ground a year later, then the animal, the offspring, is ready to be born. It's very interesting how they will come back a year later, and so because of that, what this process is called delayed fertilization, or actually delayed implantation. The fertilization takes place, but the implantation of the embryo into the uterus gets delayed so that the animal will be born a year later. Whales, so the cetaceans, these are the whales. They breed and deliver in the water. And so when the young are born, that calf needs to surface immediately so that they can breathe. So sometimes other adult members of the pod will help to get that calf to the surface. The mother will release milk like behind her body, and then the calf will come along and drink that. So the milk gets released as a stream behind the mother's body, and then the calf will drink it. For all of these marine mammals, the milk content, the milk that is released by the mother for the young is very high in fat. And the reason for that is that these organisms, these animals need to, because they live in water, they need to build up a layer of blubber. So the milk that is provided by the mother has a very high fat content. Okay, so we are out of time. So that means we did not get to the reptiles or the birds. And so what I am going to try to do is, as we study other areas going forward, when we have time, I will work in the reptiles and birds. There's not a lot of information to cover on either one of those. So I'll just be working that in as we have time over the coming modules.